Okay, good day to all students of BA24 Organizational Behavior. Sorry that we were not able to meet kanina due to the presentation of the final requirement of my class in HR 140. Anyway, so we will be continuing our discussion on power, politics, and conflict. The last part is the conflict. So, napag-usapan na natin kung ano ang power and politics in organizations. Uh, natutunan natin that power is inevitable in organizations and people use power through various tactics. And even with balanced power, organizations have politics, and that is a normal and expected occurrence in every organization. Now, isang area na hindi pa natin na-address is what happens when power and politics lead to conflict. Okay? And I want to be clear at the onset that conflict will happen. Okay? Mangyayari at mangyayari na mayroong conflict sa organization. Pero hindi yan sign na yung organization ay nagfe-fail o hindi effective, but rather we have to have this kind of mindset that conflict is a sign of organizational complexity. In fact, some of the best organizations have healthy conflict. So, ibig sabihin, meron tayong different perspective clashing, different interests being negotiated, different views of the future being debated, so on and so forth. But the question isn't whether conflict happens, because it always does. Conflict will always happen in every organization, lalo na kapag yan ay merong tao. But the question is, how do we manage it as managers? Can we allow conflict to surface important issues and lead to better decisions, or does conflict become destructive and tear the organization apart? So yung pag-uusapan natin, understanding conflict and mastering conflict management as a fundamental management skill. Okay, so let me ask you something. How many of you have experienced conflict in your respective organization that you are a member in, or even into your personal relationships? I'm guessing, because we cannot interact because this is recorded. I'm guessing that all of you have experienced conflict. Tama o mali? Tama. I don't know kung hindi mo pa naranasan tong conflict. Baka hindi ka tao. O kaya wala kang ka-relationship. You're not dealing with other people. But the reality is, conflict is unavoidable when people interact with one another. And that is also the management reality, na conflict unavoidable yan sa organization. And another management reality is that a huge part of your job as managers will be dealing with conflict. Okay? Conflict sa manager, sa mga team members, conflict dun sa team ninyo, dun sa department, and etc. Later on, pag-uusapan natin yung mga reasons kung bakit pa nagkaroon ng conflict and types of conflict. Okay? So, napaka gandang topic itong conflict management, especially for you, that if you want to become an effective manager in the future, kailangan meron ka talagang skill on conflict management. So, hindi optional skill yan. This is a core skill that you have to master for you to become effective as a manager. Okay, now, so nasabi na natin that conflict is inevitable in organizations, na kapag meron kang skill to manage conflict effectively in the organization, you become an effective manager. But ano ba ang definition ng conflict? So we have here the definition of conflict. So you can see in your slide in here, it is the self-interested struggle that arises when the goal-directed behavior of one person or group blocks the goal-directed behavior of one another person or group. So what does this mean? So it means conflict involves people or groups pursuing their own goals and interests. For example, an employee wants a raise because they need more money, ayaw ibigay ng management because walang silang budget, or a certain department wants budget because they have projects, but the other department also have their own projects na hindi pa nabibigyan ng project. So sino ang priority, sinong mauna? A manager may want to hire more staff because their workload is high, pero yung nga walang pambayad yung management. Okay, so these are all self-interested goals. So there's nothing wrong with that. People naturally pursue yung kanilang mga own interest. Pero yung mga interest nila often clash with other people or groups na meron ding legitimate interest. So that triggers the condition of conflict. Okay? Nag-a-arise yan because one person or group blocks the goal-directed behavior of another. So conflict doesn't happen just because people have different goals. No? Conflict happens when, for example, goal A and goal B are not just different, they are incompatible or blocking each other. So there is a different goal between the two groups. For example, sa isang organization, a developer wants to focus on building new features, pero yung QA manager wants to focus on testing before releasing the product. Okay, so these goals block each other. Fast features equals less testing and quality risk. Thorough testing equals slower feature release. So one person's goal pursuit blocks the other. Okay? Then, nagkakaroon din tayo ng tinatawag dyan na department level conflict, and because of personal goals blocking work. So, the key insight in this definition is that conflict happens when pursuing goal A makes it harder or impossible to pursue goal B. Okay? So, kailangan natin maintindihan that conflict is about interest, hindi personalities. Okay? Kailangan nating address yan because pag meron tayong view na yung conflict is about interest, not personality, we could address the conflict. So, we could work with the interest, pero kapag personality, medyo mahirap na baguhin yan. Yung personality ng ibang tao. So, we have to make it sure that yung mga conflict na meron sa isang organization is more on structural rather than personal. Okay? So, yun yung definition natin ng organizational conflict. So, conflict arises from competing interests, and it often stems from various organizational structure in the organization. Could be, later on makikita natin, could be rule ambiguity, resource scarcity, overlapping responsibilities, incompatible goals, yung mga ganon. And it can be functional, yung conflict could be functional or dysfunctional. Makikita mo dito na yung conflict merong possible na dalawang impact sa performance. Okay. So this will be explained later on, yung traditional view at saka contemporary view ng conflict. Okay. And also we have here the levels of conflict. Could be individual level, person versus person. So this happens between individuals. Two employees can work together. An employee and their manager are in conflict. Two peers are competing. So individual level conflict yung mga ganun. Then we also have group level, group versus group. Okay. So department A versus department B, team 1 versus team 2, one division versus other. Pwede ring group level conflict, just like a larger organizational dynamics, interdepartmental conflict, so on and so forth. Okay. So let's proceed to the next slide. We have here the traditional and contemporary view on conflict. So na-define na natin kung ano ang conflict. Now, let us understand the evolution in how conflict is being viewed in organizational science. Okay, so first we have here the traditional theory. So this view of conflicts dominates the organizational thinking for most of the 20th century. So they are saying that conflicts are bad and should be avoided. So they are saying that conflict is a dysfunction, conflict is a problem, that organizations should be designed to prevent conflict and minimize discord. Yan yung view ng traditional theory. Okay? So, ang assumption nila is that less conflict is equals to better organization, which is not always true. So, this type of view could lead to a workplace or organization wherein they will value hierarchy, okay? Rules and procedures are so detailed, communication are controlled, conformity are rewarded, and the dissent is being discouraged para walang conflict na mag-emerge. Okay? They also have this view that conflicts are caused by troublemakers. So, sinasabi nila na conflict doesn't emerge from legitimate clashes of interest or poor organizational design. So, they are just simply saying that conflict is caused by problem people. Yung mga troublemakers, yung mga difficult personalities. Okay? So, yung approach nila dito is pag mayroong conflict na nag-emerge, the response was to identify sino ang nagkakos ng conflict na yan. Okay? And the troublemakers are being punished or removed. And yung mga issues, mga interest or structural issues weren't addressed. And leaders believe that removing the troublemaker would eliminate the conflict. Okay? So ano ang result niyan? So hindi na-address yung underlying issue. The worst part is they are removing the person who would create resentment and more conflict. So ang solution sa traditional view is subdue conflict through authority. So the solution to conflict for those traditional theory is hierarchical authority. So palaging yung senior manager ang nagde-decide, ang may final say ng solution. And worst is they will impose their authority and gagamitin nila yung authority nila to suppress conflict. So maybe they will be telling the one who causes conflict that you should follow, you should comply with our decision para hindi na lumaki yung issue na yan. So that is not a good way to solve a conflict. Kaya ang structure ng traditional theory is they assume clear hierarchical organization. So sinasabi nila that organization should be strictly hierarchical. So merong clear reporting lines, clear authority, clear decision making, everyone knows their place, and merong clear boundaries. So ang kanilang thinking, perspective is that if everyone knows who reports to whom and who decides what, conflict won't emerge. But that is a very flawed assumption because it's like what we will be discussing later. Conflict doesn't come from unclear authority. It comes from competing legitimate interests. It comes from organizational change and uncertainty. It comes from resource authority. Later on, pag-uusapan natin yung mga sources of conflict. And if conflict are being treated in a very traditional way, the result could be, or the impact could be, lower organizational performance. In fact, this is the result or bad result of believing in this traditional theory. It will always lead to lower performance. Kasi nga, kapag yung conflict na yan nag-occur because managers have not designed an organizational structure that will allow people, functions, or divisions to cooperate. Okay? So, ti pabasulan no kati traditional theory ket poor organizational design will cause conflict. Okay? And conflict will lead to poor performance. So, ang main solution nila dyan is better org design to prevent conflict. Ang problema lang sa view na ganyan is that it's partly incomplete. Okay? Kasi nga, timbak na tayo, and some conflict is inevitable even though maganda yung design mo. And some conflict is actually healthy. So, if you try to eliminate all conflict, it prevents important voices from being heard. And the cost of preventing all conflict is higher than the cost of managing some conflict. Now, we have here the contemporary theory na nag-emerge in the late 20th century, and it dominates now modern organizational thinking. So, sinasabi niya na ang view ngayon ng contemporary theory is that conflicts are natural and can be beneficial. Okay, so, conflict is natural, inevitable in organizations. Ang sinasagot dito is not how do we prevent conflict. Hindi na yun. Okay, yung sinasagot na question. But, how do we manage conflict effectively? So, nare-recognize ng contemporary thinking that conflict arises naturally from organizational complexity, legitimate interests often clash, different perspectives are vulnerable, some conflicts will lead to better thinking, and organizations that prevent all conflict often stagnate. Okay? Yan yung view nila. So, ang assumption ng contemporary theory is that if we are able to manage conflict, it could lead to better organizational innovation and decision making. Okay? For example, Google, okay, they encourages debate and different perspective. They don't try to minimize conflict. In fact, they try to create an environment where conflict can surface important issues and could lead to better decisions. And, the results speak for themselves. There are a lot of innovations that is happening in or with Google. So, ang cause ng conflict according to the contemporary view is conflict emerges as a result of change. So, hindi pala kinokos ng mga troublemakers ang conflict. Nag-e-emerge yan naturally as a result of organizational change. When the organization change, people's roles, goals, and interests also shift. That will create conflict. Okay, later on makikita natin ano ba yung mga sources. Okay. Okay, ano pa? Yung kanilang solution. Ang solution doon sa contemporary theories, we have to manage conflict efficiently. So, it's not to suppress the conflict through authority, it is to manage it skillfully. Yung conflict na yan. Makikita natin mamaya how to address, ano yung mga process, ano yung mga conflict resolution behaviors. Madidiscuss natin yan mamaya as we go on. Okay? Ang mechanism, innovation as a fusion of ideas. So, nare-recognize ng theory na to that conflict can lead to innovation, especially when there will be different perspective who are clashing in a healthy or functional way. Kasi nga, pag mayroong mga debates, mayroong different perspective, there's brainstorming, ideas get refined through debates, through brainstorming, and then new approaches could emerge. And team can learn with each other and they could develop better solutions. So, yan yung tinatawag natin na innovation as fusion of ideas. Okay? And ang impact niyan could increase organizational performance. If conflict are well managed, it can actually improve performance. Okay? So, importante ang conflict to increase organizational performance. But, again, hindi naman maganda na palagi mayroong conflict. The keyword here is moderate conflict. Kasi pag too much conflict naman, destructive yan. Pag zero conflict, destructive din. So, the sweet spot is to manage conflict. So, mayroong balance. We do it moderately. Okay? So, as a manager, we have to shift from traditional to contemporary thinking completely. So, medyo layuan natin yung traditional theory. Hindi ibig sabihin na pag merong conflict, failure ka na sa manager. Okay? Kung merong conflict, huwag kang maghanap ng troublemaker. Kung merong conflict, huwag mong gamitin yung authority mo to suppress the conflict, okay? Or to avoid addressing the conflict. Okay? You have to think like a contemporary view. You will see conflict as an opportunity. So you might be asking, what can we learn from this? You look for the underlying interest. What's driving this conflict? What's the issue here? And with that, you could facilitate discussion to surface concerns. You will be working towards identifying solutions. And in fact, you will be creating a team culture where people will feel safe raising their concerns, their issues. So contemporary view is much better, and modern organizations needs managers who understand contemporary theory so that they could create psychological safety, will invite and listen to diverse perspective, and facilitate healthy conflict. So, yon ang kailangan nating ma-develop na perspective or view. Okay? Okay. Next tayo, punta tayo sa sources of organizational conflict. Okay? So, ano yung mga specific situations and conditions that will create conflict in organizations? Okay? Number one is differentiation. So, we now understand yung mga theories, di ba? Napag-usapan na about conflict, contemporary, traditional view. Now, why does conflict actually emerge in real organization? Ano yung nag-trigger dyan? What situations naturally leads to conflict? And the biggest source of conflict in organization is something we call differentiation. Let me explain what it means and bakit ito ay isa sa mga pinaka main source of conflict. So we have the definition there, the process of splitting employees and tasks into different subunits or groups to produce goods and services more effectively. Okay. So this was discussed in your organizational management course when it's part of organizing function of management. Okay, we organize units, functions in the management in the organization, especially specialization and functional areas of management. So, normally, di ba, dun sa isang organization, kailangan ma-split yung mga trabaho dyan into specialized units. Meron tayong manufacturing, who actually create the product, R&D department, who will develop the product, marketing, who will sell and promote the product, finance department, who will manage the money, operations department, who runs the entire process of the organization, and HR department. In your end, as a student of BSBA HRM, you manage people. So each department specializes in what they do best. Okay? So, maganda naman ng specialization. No doubt na napakalaking tulong ito because it promotes efficiency, focus, effectiveness, scale. Through specialization, nagkakaroon tayo ng efficient and effective operations ng isang organization. But differentiation creates conflict. Although necessary and good ng differentiation, it's one of the main source of conflict. Why? Because different departments develop different orientations, different goals, different priorities, and different worldviews. So, with these various differences, nagkakaroon ng clash, nagkakaroon ng conflict. Okay? So, that's the thing that we will be exploring, okay, here in this topic or slide. Number one is yung functional orientation. Different functions develop different orientation, beliefs about the right way to increase organizational performance. So each department develop its own priorities, own culture, and sometimes even way of thinking. Okay, we have various departments with different orientation. For example, manufacturing. Okay? Ang orientation niya, short-term, cost-focused efficiency. So, they keep on thinking how to minimize costs, how to produce efficiently, how to keep operations running smoothly, how to avoid disruption. So, iba yung gusto nila. They want standardized process. They want to batch products efficiently, minimal changes so that there is lesser disruption in the production. They want to focus on cost control. Now, iba naman ang orientation ng R&D, ng marketing. R&D would say, we have to innovate, we have to develop new products, we have to explore new technologies, we have to stay ahead of competition. So, iba yung kanilang orientation. That is salungat doon sa orientation ngayon ng manufacturing. Ngayon sa marketing, iba rin. Okay? We need to satisfy our customers, we need to respond to market demands, we need to be flexible and adaptive, we need to meet customer expectations. So, marketing wants to offer the product in multiple colors, sizes, configurations based on what the customer wants. And therefore, with these three various orientations, various perspective, how they operate yung kanilang mga or perform yung kanilang mga roles. So nagkakaroon tayo ngayon ng conflict between manufacturing and R&D, between manufacturing and marketing. Okay? So, for example, manufacturing and marketing. Ang gusto namang ng manufacturing, standardized product rather, minimal variety. They want long production runs. Ngayon sa marketing, gusto niya customized options, variety, quick response to customer preferences. So, magkaiba, magkasalungat. Customized products are expensive to manufacture. Standardized products don't meet diverse customer needs. Yan yung gustong i-promote ng marketing, di ba? So, technically, different goals now blocking the other goal of the other group will now create conflict. Okay? So, that is the functional differentiation. That is the primary source of conflict, healthy conflict in organization. Okay? Okay. So, yung mga goals na yan, departmental goals, conflict with each other. Okay? So, hindi naman sila nag-conflict because people are unreasonable. Okay? Just because the organization has created specialization or specialized departments with different goals, and those goals are inherently in tension with one another. Okay? Second is the status inconsistencies. So, functions whose activities are central to operations may view themselves as more important, creating conflict when resources are allocated. Okay. So, this is more of, alam mo, yung feeling na mas importante kami na department. So, that's why kami dapat yung priority. Kami dapat yung ma-attain yung goal. Okay? So when you differentiate into departments, not all departments are seen as equally important. Some are seen as core or central to operations, others are seen as support and peripheral. Okay, so nagkakaroon tayo ng tinatawag na status hierarchy. Okay? Wherein mas importante kami compared sa HR. For example, manufacturing. Mas importante kami compared sa HR because they're just there to provide administrative support. So, maybe marketing would also say, no, we are the one who was actually bring in the revenue. Kasi kahit mag-grade ka, kung hindi mo mabenta, walang silbi. Ganyan ang litanya, di ba? Ang reasoning ng mga nasa sales. That's why we should have higher status compared to other departments. So, ngayon, ang problem dyan is, yung mga high status functions, they will see themselves as more important now than the lower status functions. Especially, when resources are limited, they fight to protect their budget because they see themselves as more important. Diba? They might think, HR ko lang naman yan. Support function lang. Manufacturing's the core. So, kami dapat ang merong budget. Okay? So, yon yung concept ng status inconsistencies, how it creates conflict in the organization. Okay? Ano pa ba? Ang next na kwan natin dito. Okay? So, ang susunod naman is yung sa task relationships. Okay, task relationships. Okay. So, aside from differentiation, we also have here task interdependencies and task relationship. So, even though we have different departments doing different things inside the organization, yung mga trabaho in each department are often interconnected. They support one another. Okay, they depend on each other to complete their tasks. And when the work is interdependent, conflict naturally emerge. Okay? So, yan yung concept ng task relationship. Okay? Kapag you depend with one another to complete your work, tension can arise, especially if they're, number one, overlapping authority. So, ibig sabihin, two people or departments think they are responsible for the same decision or task. Okay? When two functions or different functions, divisions claim authority for the same task, conflict may develop. Okay? Especially kapag hindi clear yung distribution ng mga roles and tasks, because the two managers may think they have the authority for the same decision, two departments may think that they're responsible for the same function, and kapag hindi clear ang reporting lines, hindi clearly na-define yung roles, nagkakaroon talaga ng conflict dyan. Okay? So, there will be pinpointing one another. Ikaw may trabaho nito. Hindi. Trabaho mo yan. Ganyan. Ako dapat na mag-decide. Diba? So, they would say that this is my decision. No, that's not yours. It's us who will decide. Okay? So, that create problems. So, overlap in responsibilities, and if those responsibilities are not defined, magkakaroon ng conflict. Okay? Ano pa? Ito eh. Okay? Task interdependence, overlapping authority, and lastly, we have here incompatible evaluation system. Okay, balikan ko lang konti itong task interdependence. Kaya nga, dependency without control, different priorities, blame dynamics. When things go wrong, department blame each other, especially pag hindi clear na designate yung trabaho. Okay? Then, incompatible evaluation system. So, this pertains naman sa rewards and measurement of performance levels ng mga various departments. Okay? When organization measures and rewards different department differently, it will create conflict because, number one, some departments are rewarded for things that hurt other departments. Some departments contributions are being recognized, aren't yung mga iba hindi nabibigyan ng recognition or reward. Sometimes hindi bibigyan ng incentive, yung ibang department nabigyan, bakit kami wala? Okay? So, that could lead into conflict. Okay? So, yun yung task relationships as sources of organizational conflict. Another is yung resource scarcity. Okay? So, resource scarcity, this is probably, ito yung pinaka-most straightforward source of conflict. Kasi, kapag hindi enough yung resources to be given to people, kulang ang budget, kulang ang pera, kulang ang materials, normally, anong ang normal na mangyayari kapag kulang ang budget, kulang ang resources, kulang ang materials, people will compete for them. Because that's human nature, di ba? Talagang makikipaglabang ka para ma-meet yung mga goals mo, ma-meet yung need mo, especially kapag scarce yung resources. Okay, when resources are limited and multiple parties wants those resources nag-emerge ang conflict. So, whether yung resources na yan ay money, people, equipment, anything valuable, anything na kailangan nila, talagang mag-emerge ang conflict. So, basic economics naman yan, di ba? When demand exceeds supply, you have a scarcity. So, when there is scarcity, people compete. And when people compete, nag-emerge ang conflict. Okay? So, yung mga yan, capital allocation, ano pa, budgets, and even personnel resources. So, competition for talented employees, especially if we have limited talented employees. So, key parties competing for resources could be divisions, shareholders, corporate headquarters, and employees themselves. Talagang, for example, yung promotion pa lang, di ba? Talagang competition yung promotion because not everyone can be promoted. Okay? So, people seek higher salaries, higher benefits, and when these resources are limited, talagang nagkakaroon ng conflict. Okay? Because of competitions. Okay? So, yon yung mga various na sources of organizational conflict. Okay. Pero, paano ba i-manage itong resource scarcity? Okay. So, basically, resource scarcity can be managed through transparency. Okay. Sila yung binigyan namin ng budget because talagang kailangan nila para mag-continue na mag-sustain yung ating operation. Dapat meron ding clear criteria and dapat involved din lahat in the allocation of these resources. Okay. Now, okay, natapos na natin yung mga sources. Okay, yung mga conditions for that creates a conflict. So, naintindihan natin na conflict doesn't just suddenly exist in one state. Okay? And makikita natin dito na yung conflict pala merong stages. Okay? It escalates. Okay? Hindi lang yung one-time process na nag-conflict ta, dahil tinapasama kayo. Okay? No, hindi pala ganun. So, conflict is a dynamic process. So, we have here the Pondis model ng conflict stages or process. Okay? So, it describes conflict as dynamic process with 5 sequential stages. So, the first stages are latent and perceived conflict. So, ano itong latent conflict? Latent means hidden or not yet visible. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, latent conflict is a conflict that exists but hasn't surfaced yet. So, ibig sabihin, no actual conflict exists yet. Ibig sabihin, people aren't actively arguing or fighting. Okay? So, naturally, there are potential conflict be at the surface such as resource scarcity, task interdependencies, different goals. Okay? And then, sources of conflict cause it to emerge. So, yan yung mga structural factors na diniscuss natin kanina. Okay, so in this latent conflict stage, although present na yung conflict, differentiation, resources, interdependencies, but people haven't recognized it yet as a conflict. Although tension exists beneath the surface, hindi pa visible unless later on it will be triggered. Okay? Yan yung latent conflict na sinasabi natin. Okay, it's still the conditions of conflict exist but hindi pa visible na nakikita sa wala pang sigawan, wala pang reklamuhan, okay? Wala pang debate na nangyayari, ganyan. Okay. And then, the latent conflict can progress to perceived conflict. Ano naman itong perceived conflict? So this is when parties recognize that goal interference exists. So they see it, they know it's there, and then parties recognize that there is a goal interference. Okay, your goals are interfering with my goals. Mga ganyan. Iba yung gusto nyo, iba yung gusto namin. Okay? Then each party will search for the origins of conflict. Why is this happening? Whose fault is this? Then, uh, pwede nang mag-escalate ang conflict as parties argue about what causes this conflict. It's your fault. This is because of you, because of your department, that this conflict is happening. So what this means is that people have become aware that there's conflict. People are starting to blame each other. Meron ng arguments na nag-emerge kung bakit ba nag-exist ang conflict na to. And then people are now taking sides. They're protecting their own turf. And the conflict is now visible and actively being discussed. Okay? So, yan yung perceived conflict na nangyayari ngayon. Okay? So, meron ng arguments. Whose priority, whose approach is right. So, nag-argue na sila about the causes. So, masabi nating perceived conflict yan when people start arguing about why the conflict exists. And sometimes, yung mga visible na nakita natin dito is they blame the other person, other groups. They make accusations, they take emotional positions, they become defensive. Okay? So, the conflict becomes bigger than the original issue. Okay. So, yan yung stage 1 at saka stage 2. Okay. Then we have here now stage 3, which is the felt conflict. So, it escalates further. Ito na yung felt conflict. This is where emotions now enter the picture. People will feel anger, frustration, anxiety, or hostility about the conflict. Okay. So, meron ng negative feelings develop between parties. Okay, meron ng emotional reactions, hindi na lang basta-basta intellectual disagreement. It's about us versus them mentality, nag-emerge na yan. So, people stop seeing each other as teammates and start seeing each other as adversaries. Okay? And normally, team members support their side. Di ba? Loyalty to the other side also decreases. So, ito na ang felt conflict. It's no longer about resolving the issue. People are now emotionally invested. Relationship starts deteriorating. People become defensive and protective. So, ito yung part ng stage ng conflict na medyo dangerous na siya. Especially kapag yung emotions pumasok, conflict becomes much harder to resolve. And sometimes when emotions enter, when emotions are high, people are no longer thinking rationally. They are now reacting emotionally. Okay? So, yan, nag-emerge na yung emotions, nag-enter na sa picture. And then, eventually, this could escalate to manifest conflict. Manifest means visible na siya, open na siya. This is the stage when conflict becomes openly expressed through aggressive behavior. So people now are openly fighting, arguing, confronting each other. Parties try to hurt each other. Hindi na silang nag-disagree. They are trying to damage the other side. So, in fact, there could be, in extreme cases, there could be physical confrontation. There will be physical violence and lack of cooperation. Okay? It could be sabotage. Okay? Dun sa trabaho ng ibang department o ibang grupo. Meron ng open confrontations na nangyayari. They could be hostile to other department. And the rest. Okay? It could be when projects get blocked, when there are accusations, hostility, they refuse to cooperate with other departments. So that is now manifest conflict, and this type of conflict or this level of conflict is openly damaging to the organization. Then number 5, conflict aftermath. Okay? Aftermath is what remains after the conflict is resolved. Sometimes even after it ends without it even ends even walang talagang na-resolve na conflict. Okay, so ano ba ang characteristic ng conflict aftermath? It could be resolved through various means, could be negotiation, mediation, compromise, or one group, okay, have attained their own goals, okay, in that conflict. Okay, it could be yung resolve would be it leaves lasting impact on future responses, and could also promote good relationship if resolved in a compromising manner. Pag na-resolve yan fairly and collaboratively, it could be one way to strengthen relationship. Okay. So there are two possible paths in the conflict aftermath. Bad aftermath, kapag hindi na handle properly yung conflict, so pwedeng mag-continue yung resentment, nasira yung trust, future cooperation will now be more difficult, and sometimes nawawasak yung relationship, okay, and could lead also to similar conflict in the future. And of course, meron din namang positive side yan pag na-manage na maayos ang conflict. Nare-repair yung relationship, people respect the process, even hindi nila nakuha yung gusto nila, trust can be rebuilt, future cooperation improves, and the good side could be people would be much better equipped to handle yung mga susunod na conflict. Okay? So, etong conflict aftermath determines whether this was a productive conflict or a destructive conflict. So, that's why napaka-importante yung concept ng conflict resolution behaviors and conflict management, because it will determine whether that conflict will enhance or undermines organizational effectiveness. Okay? Yun naman yung key takeaway dito sa model ni Pondy. The same conflict can have completely different outcomes depending on how the conflict was managed. So, bad management of conflict will escalate through all 5 stages, becomes destructive, and leaves lasting damage. Good management of conflict, kapag na-address early, na-resolve siya fairly, it will leave relationships stronger. So, yan yung trabaho ng mga manager, to manage conflict para ito ay maka-enhance to our organizational effectiveness rather than undermines our organizational performance. Okay? So, now, what is the best time to intervene? Okay? So, doon pa lang sa stage 1 saka stage 2, dapat ba address na yung conflict na yan. Kasi pag nakarating ka sa stage 3, 4, it will become harder now to resolve the conflict because emotions are now involved, especially pag nasa stage 5 ka na, too late to prevent the damage. Okay, you can only repair na lang aftermath. Okay, so make sure that you recognize early, stage 1, stage 2 pa lang, na-recognize namin na mayroong conflict. Okay, and we have to address underlying issues. We don't just manage emotions, we fix the structural problems. We have to keep our emotions in check. We have to help people express concerns professionally before it becomes professional. And dapat meron ding fair resolution. Dapat fair, transparent yung pag-solve ng issue. Okay? And of course, we have to learn from the conflict. Diba? Kailangan natin gamitin yung conflict as information to avoid organizational problems in the future. Okay? So, conflict is a dynamic process based on the Pondy's model, and the earlier, the better. mas effective yung ating conflict management. Okay? So, natapos na natin yan mga yan. What is conflict? What causes conflict? Ano yung mga stages ng conflict? How does conflict escalates? Now, the final question that we have to answer is, how do we actually resolve conflict? Okay? So, number one, we have to discuss first etong conflict resolution behavior. Okay. Conflict resolution behavior. So how do we actually resolve conflict? There could be 5 different approaches to managing conflict, and each has different strengths and works better in different scenarios or situation. Okay? So we have here 5 negotiation spectrum. So as you can see in this diagram, there are two concerns here: concern for others versus self-interest. Yan yung binabalance natin dito sa approaches o dito sa resolution behaviors na ito. So yung vertical axis, self-interest, how much you care about your own goal. Horizontal, concern for others, how much you care about the other party's goal. So different conflict resolution approaches balance these two concerns differently. Okay? When you have a high concern for others plus low self-interest, ang tawag dyan ay accommodation. So you give up your goals. Mapagbigay ka. You accommodate the other party. Meron naman tayong tinatawag na collaboration. Ito, high concern for others and high self-interest. So collaboration. Both of you gets what you want. Okay. We also have here low concern for others and low concern for self. Avoidance yan. Ito, avoidance. You ignore the problem. Amlatan, lipatan din, awandetan. Ganon, yung avoidance para wala ng away, wala ng gulo. Yan yung mindset dito sa avoidance. Then we have here naman yung competition, low concern for others and high self-interest. So you pursue your goals only. I should win and you should lose. Ganyan yung mentality sa competition. And then we have compromise. Ito, okay? Split the difference. Okay? There are some goals na ma-attain ko, ma-achieve ko, and also there would be some goals na ma-attain mo. Okay, yan yung compromise. Bargaining to reach a mutually acceptable solution. So, both parties give up some of what they want. They meet in the middle. So, parang 50-50. 50-50 lang to. We solve the difference and increase our combined performance. Ginagamit to when both parties' goals are moderately important, when a quick solution is needed, when the stakes are too high, and when both parties can accept getting less. So, ginagamit yan sa sales, to use expensive customized materials for customer orders para masatisfy yung customers. Manufacturing, pwedeng gumamit tayo ng cheap, standardized materials to reduce costs. So, for example, ang compromise dyan is use standard material for most orders, allow customization for 10% of orders. So, both sides get something. Both sides give up something. So, this is a very fast and practical way to keep things moving. Ang weakness nga lang nito, both parties get less than they wanted and nobody's really fully satisfied. Collaboration naman, working together to find a solution that benefits all parties. So both parties work together to find a creative solution where both of them get what they want. So walang splitting the difference, but they find ways on how to satisfy both interests. So ginagamit ito when both parties' goals are very important, when time allows for deep discussion, when the stakes are high, when relationships are important, and when creative solutions exist. Okay? So, both of the, let's say for example, yung sales kanina, gusto nyo ng expensive, customized materials para masatisfy yung customer. Sa manufacturing, gusto nyo ng cheap, standardized materials para ma-reduce yung cost. So, they could design a product that could use standard materials, pero mag-add ng customizable components para masatisfy yung customer. So, both of them na-attain yung lower cost and na-attain ng customer satisfaction. So, sometimes this is better because both of them get what they want. Okay, yun yung strength nito. Produce best solutions, strengthen relationship. Pero ang weakness nga lang, takes time and it requires trust and good communication. Strategy number 3, collaboration. One party allows the other to dictate a solution. Okay? So the other party give up their interest to let the other party win. One side wins, one side loses. Okay? And anong mangyayari dun sa natalo? It could lead to resentment. Pero, pwedeng gamitin ito kapag yung goal ng isang party is much more important. When preserving the relationship is critical, when you realize that you are wrong, and when the issue doesn't matter much to you. So, sige, accommodate ko na lang yung gusto mo kasi hindi naman important dito sa akin. The strength is it preserves relationship and shows respect. Pero ang weakness nga lang, magtatay, it could create resentment, especially for those who lose, yung hindi nakuha yung gusto. So, ma-feel nila that they are not heard. Number 4, avoidance. Ito yung pinakaayaw natin na mangyari sa conflict. Refusing to acknowledge the real source of the problem. You ignore the conflict, hoping it will go away, not addressing the real issue. Although meron namang benefit ito, especially when the issue is trivial, yung conflict is trivial, when you need time to cool down, when the timing isn't right, when you truly don't have the authority to decide. So, yun ang isa sa mga strength. It buys you some time in some situations, especially pag mataas na yung emotion, ganyan. Pero yung nga lang, hindi nasusolve yung main issue kapag meron tayong avoidance type of conflict resolution. The problem may continue, may escalate, and sometimes relationship can also be deteriorate. And then lastly, number 5 is competition. Focus on pursuing one's own interests exclusively. So one party or group focuses only on their own goals and tries to win the conflict. The other party's interests are ignored. Okay? So, kailan ba ginagamit ito? When a quick decision is absolutely necessary. When the issue is critical and one side must win. When you have clear authority. And if you have a very, very healthy organizations that kailangang merong competition. Okay, so ang strength nito is it's a quick way to make decisions, especially kapag merong mga emergencies doon sa organization. Ang weakness nga lang, because you win, some loses, it damages relationship, it creates resentment, and even escalates future conflict. Okay, so now I just want to emphasize here that managers must help parties find compromise to resolve conflicts effectively. Okay, pero ang best outcome talaga dito sa conflict resolution it should be collaboration. Okay? Although compromise is common, so many conflicts get resolved through compromise because it's practical and sometimes most of the time it works, but ang ideal talaga is collaboration. So if you could get two parties to collaborate, you get better solutions and strengthen the relationship. So yan yung pinaka the best na outcome. Okay? And as much possible, we avoid avoidance and competition. Okay? So how to choose the right strategy depends on the situation. Okay, say for example, how important is this issue to each party? If both of them would say that this is very important to us, so you try collaboration. If it's moderately important, you compromise. One is much more important para sa kanila yon, you use accommodation. Okay, in terms of time, how much time do we have dito sa conflict na to? If you have plenty of time, sige, collaboration. If you have limited time, compromise. If ito ay emergency, edi competition, you give it to someone who has authority. In terms of relationship, very important ba to preserve the relationship? It could be accommodation or collaboration. Kung moderate, compromise. Kung hindi importante, hindi competition. Yeah. And also, if you want to find a creative solution, if you want to provide or create a solution, creative solution, collaboration could be a key. If both parties have fixed positions, compromise ang pwedeng gamitin dyan. Okay? And last 2 slides na lang tayo. And before we go to promoting effective compromise, let us discuss first etong individual and group level conflict management. Okay? So, katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, conflict happens at different levels, di ba? And you manage it differently depending on the level. So, individual level, person to person, group level, department to department, or team to team conflicts. Okay. So, individual level, ano yung mga strategies natin dito? Kasi ang binabago lang natin dito is yung attitude or behavior ng individuals in conflict. Okay? If there's conflict between two people, you focus on the individuals involved. So, number 1, education and training. Okay? So, ang binibigay dito is sensitivity training to help people understand differences and resolve conflicts. Kaya napag-usapan na natin noon doon sa individual behavior, personality, values, perception, motivation, all of this pwedeng maging sources ng conflict. So, but when you become understanding or sensitive doon sa differences ninyo, pwedeng mabawasan, okay, or ma-resolve in a good way yung mga conflict na yan. Role transitions, you transfer employees to new positions or rotate jobs to develop fresh perspective and separate conflicting parties. So, pwede yan. Okay? Especially kapag yung dalawang tao na yun nasa isang department, they cannot truly work together. So, pwede mong bigyan pwede mo siyang i-transfer o pwedeng mag-rotate yung trabaho niya. Okay? When the conflict is also destructive, pwedeng gamitin itong role transitions. Number 3, negotiation approach. Ito yung step-by-step process to help resolve disputes between employees. So, ginagamit ito when both parties are willing to discuss, when you have time for the process, and when conflict is still at the perceived or felt stages. Okay, number 4, ito yung last resort. Ito na yung pagtanggal mo ng tao, firing people and replacing them when conflicts cannot be resolved. So, ginagamit ito when all other methods have failed, when conflict is destructive to the team, and when the person is constantly problematic. Okay. Now, proceed naman tayo sa group level management. So, this is about changing attitudes and behaviors of groups in conflict. Okay. So, the first is physical separation. Ibig sabihin, you deny groups the opportunity to interact face-to-face to eliminate potential conflict. So, ginagamit ito when groups can operate independently, when interaction isn't necessary for work, and when conflict is destructive. So, you separate them. Kapag mayroong dalawang departments, nagko-conflict about resource sharing, you reorganize them so that they operate in a completely separate locations with minimal interaction. So, yan yung strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is coordination system. So, you assign manager to coordinate groups' activities while keeping them separated. So, ginagamit yan when groups must coordinate but have conflicting interests, when there's a neutral coordinator that will help them, and when groups can't resolve coordination themselves. Strategy number 3, direct negotiations. You hold negotiation between groups with or without third-party mediator. So, pwedeng gamitin ito when groups are willing to discuss, when you want them to resolve it themselves, and when conflict is moderate. Then, lastly, third-party intervention. Ito ay gumagamit ka na ngayon ng mediator or arbiter to help resolve conflict between groups. So, ginagamit to when groups won't negotiate directly, when neutrality is needed, and when conflict is very complex. Okay? So, hindi na kayo makapag-usap. Kailangan nyo ng third party, kailangan nyo ng expert, kailangan nyo ng respected someone who is neutral to the situation. Okay? So, sila yung tutulong sa inyo to understand each other's issues and constraints and find workable solutions. Okay? So, how do we use this as a guide? Let's say, for example, when someone comes to you with a conflict, siyempre, tatanungin mo muna, is this conflict between two individuals? Kapag yes, edi use individual. No, and then continue tayo dito sa group level management. Okay? Especially if that conflict is between departments, ibig sabihin, kapag by departments yan, separation, coordination, negotiation, mediation ang pwedeng gawin. Pero pag no ang sagot mo, it might be resource scarcity, task interdependencies. So, you need to escalate it, or ano ba? Kailangan bang start tayo sa simple approach? Okay? So, the key takeaway here is that yung nga, kapag individual level, ito yung gagawin. And kapag group level naman, ito yung gagawin. And we have to match the strategy to the conflict. So, we have to understand if this is just personal or structural. And then the last slide we have here, and we will now about to finish our discussion on conflict. We have now here 5 tactics to structure negotiation and bargaining process para ma-make natin yung compromise and collaboration more effectively. Number 1 is emphasize common goals. Common goals, this really binds people. Okay, kapag merong mga conflict. Okay, kasi most of the time when people are in conflict, they focus on differences, di ba? So we have to shift our focus back to their common goal. Okay? By focusing on common goals, you shift from us versus them to solving the conflict together. Okay? So, dapat meron kayong common goal para makapag-collaborate and compromise kayo. Number 2, focus on the problem, not the people. Okay? So, attack the problem, not the person. And keep the discussion focus on the issue, not on criticizing or blaming the other party. Kasi pag you get too personal, okay? If you are attacking the person, not the issue, not the problem, emotion will escalate and the resolution becomes harder. So focus on the problem, keep things professional and solvable. Okay? So wag mong gamitin yung mga word na you always, you did this, why are you being so difficult? Okay? So focus on the issue, not on each other. By focusing on the problem, you depersonalize it and make it solvable. Then number 3, focus on interest, not demands. Okay? So when we say demands, these are what the person wants. Interests are what they wanted. So You dig deeper to understand why each party wants what they want, not just what they want. Bakit mo gusto nila? Okay? I-determine mo yung reason so that we could create creative solutions that will satisfy both parties. So why is this important to you? Why are you so concerned about this? Why do you want it? Okay? So, number 4, we have here yung number 3 kasi pag naintindihan mo yung interest nila, it will lead to better solution. Then number 4, create opportunities for joint gain. Okay? So, instead of assuming that yung conflict na yan ay para mag-gain lang sila and the other person will lose, medyo mahirap isolve yan. So, you have to look for ways to expand the pie, for example, so that you could see, so that both of you can win. Okay? Kasi minsan, ang thinking natin sa conflict is a zero-sum game. Diba? That if you win, I will lose. But often, through compromise and collaboration, there are creative solutions that will let both parties win. So, dapat merong joint gain solution para ma-expand yung option. Then, lastly, number 5, focus on what is fair. Okay? So, you have to emphasize fairness. You have to use fairness and equity principles to guide how resources or outcomes are distributed. Normally, people would accept solutions they perceive as fair, even if sometimes they don't get what they want, they don't get everything that they wanted, but if transparent at saka fair yung pag-solve ng issue ng conflict na yan, they will compromise or collaborate. Okay? So, ang effective compromise and collaboration basically starts with common goal. So, you have to agree that you both want that this project or issue would be resolved or to be successful. You focus on the problem, not on the people. You explore interest, the reason why. You brainstorm kung ano bang possible na mag-gain ninyo and apply fairness principle. So when both parties feel heard, agree that the process was fair, they will commit to the solution. Okay? So, yun. So if you could use these 5 tactics in sequence when facilitating conflict resolution, you could create a very good conflict management skill, and therefore you could help the organization convert this conflict into a functional type of conflict. Okay? So, yan, natapos na natin kung ano ang conflict, what causes the conflict, how conflict escalates, ano yung mga various resolution strategies, ano yung mga management tactics, ano yung mga 5 specific tactics for promoting compromise and collaboration. If you will be applying this, if you will be mastering this, you can now have a comprehensive framework for managing conflict as a manager. Okay? Alright, so tapos na natin. Tapos na natin ang ating discussion on conflict management. Okay, so I hope that you have learned something and you will be able to apply this when you will be managing conflict, not just in the workplace, but you could also use this in your personal life or endeavors. So thank you so much, and we will be having one more topic, especially along organizational culture. Okay, thank you, and hope that you have reached this far at the end of the discussion, and thank you for watching, and nag-anos kayo.